I'm Chris Littman. I'm the Executive Director for the Professional Programs in the Case School of Engineering. And I'm happy to have everyone here today. Thank you very much for coming. I wanted to talk to you about the Masters of Engineering and Management program, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. And we'll be holding an alumni mixer afterwards for any MEM alumni that want to come join us for the mixer. It's in the Nord Atrium. The MEM program is the Masters of Engineering and Management program, and it's a wonderful opportunity for CASE undergrad students to add on a fifth year where we give them business classes and prepare them with business acumen so that they can launch their career in a much faster manner when they get into the working world. So if you're an undergraduate engineering student and you're contemplating your future career, you might want to consider the Masters of Engineering and Management program as a fifth year to your current curriculum. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator this afternoon, Jenna Wagner. I'll let her introduce herself, and come on up, Jenna.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm Jenna Wagner. I am a current Masters of Engineering Management student here. I also received my Bachelor's of Science in Biomedical Engineering here in 2021. So I picked the MEM because in my 3 internship co-op experiences, I realized that undergrad taught me a lot of the more theoretical things where I had an answer in a textbook, but in real life there are no solidified answers in textbooks. There was a lot of things that I had to learn on the job, like scalability, manufacturability, communicating with clients, and those are all things that I'm learning now in the MEM. So I'm currently applying to jobs and will be graduating in May. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists who are here to offer their expertise and for volunteering their time. I know they're all very busy. So from right to left on the table, we have Adam Snyder, then Kyle Brower, and then Chioma Onukwir. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So I'd like to introduce all of them to introduce themselves, their titles, and a little bit of, how they work in the field of humans and technology. So we can start with Adam, if you want.
My name's Adam Snyder, Chief Operating Officer at Talon Products here in Cleveland on the east side in the Collinwood neighborhood. For me, the relevance to this, I started my career and was a huge fan of manufacturing. I've been in and around manufacturing most of my career, and over the last 20 or so years, as I graduated from the MEM program in 2003, the evolution of technology and its interface with the workforce, both the individuals in workforce and the technology about how we do our work has been shifting quite a bit. So really excited to hear what the other panelists have to share and hopefully add to the conversation.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Kyle Brower. I'm a 2009 graduate of the School of Engineering, degree in chemical engineering, and a 2010 graduate of the MEM program. For me, this is a super interesting topic because I think no matter what industry you go in right now, you are influenced by technology, right? There is no more human. Everything is becoming human plus machine, right? If you think about the way you work, and whether that's in my industry, so I'm a consultant, I work for Accenture and I focus on our aerospace and defense clients, whether that's the business side of what I do, or I look at my clients and the way they're developing and manufacturing product and how that has to change. I think up and down the spectrum, you see, immense shifts from, even when I joined the workforce back in 2010 to where we are today. So super interesting topic for me and I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, I'm not allowed talking. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chioma. I am currently a technical product. Is it product? It's a new job. I am a technical product manager with Cardinal Commerce, which is a company here at Mentor, Ohio. I'm just a remote worker, so I reside in Michigan. I graduated MEM in 2018, and the reason why I took MEM was I was in polymer science and engineering here at CASE, and I'm like, I can't do pure engineering for the rest of my life. I have to get out. And MEM was a really good grad program because they focus, I feel like, they focus on the engineering side, but like more on the business side of things and the people side of things. Because when you work, you're going to be working with people. So I really like this program. As for what my how my work is relevant to today's program. So for most of my career, I've been like a compliance analyst. So I've worked a lot with data privacy, so like GDPR, CCPA. And a big thing that's important to me is like when we're collecting data, that the user understands why we're collecting it and that they have informed consent. I'm a very big proponent of informed consent and understanding how collecting data influences our lives, which right now I'm with Cardinal Commerce and we're in the payments industry. So a lot of the stuff that we do is when you swipe your card, in the background there's a lot of authentication, like are you who you say you are, and it's not someone trying to steal your card. And there's like a lot of data that goes into it, right? And then also authorizing that you have enough money. So with all the data that we use to kind of make these algorithms to make sure that a fraudster didn't just steal your card, even though it's data, there are real people that are impacted by this. So that's how like my work is relevant to today's program.
Okay, thank you all for being here again, and I can't wait to hear current or the future things that you'll be doing, because as a current MEM student, it's really exciting to see where where alumni are going, because I know that those are paths I can follow. So it is my honor to introduce Dr. Dustin Tyler, a professor of biomedical engineering. I actually took one of his classes, and the director of the Human Fusion Institute at Case Western Reserve University. Professor Tyler is going to talk about some of the things and research he is doing right now.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. I know it's a surprise you were waiting for since I came down late. I apologize. Technology, I relied on a bit too much and have messed up. But I appreciate your time. And so let me tell you just a little bit about where I started, where I am today, and where I think we're going with technology in general, right? I would start this by saying humans are probably the only species I know that are hopelessly intertwined with technology for now and forever, right? I mean, think of anything you can do without technology, from the simple thing of getting up in the morning and putting on clothes to living in your house to whatever happened is. Technology of some sort or another is part of who we are as a species ultimately, right? So for me, way back, as long as I can remember, I was going to be a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon. That was what I was going to start with, right? All the way back as early as anybody talked to me. So what are you going to do with your life? I'm going to be a surgeon. What kind of surgeon? I remember my answer was always, I don't know, whoever does the most surgery. I realized this is what I thought would be really cool. But then I started getting into high school, into that kind of time in your life where you start to learn not about what other people are doing and see what's on TV, but you start to play with math and physics, and you start to learn biology at a different level. And that was actually really interesting to me, how math could describe what's going on. And I was going through grade school, high school in the 70s and 80s. That was when computers were becoming a big thing, right? That's when the first computers were starting to be something you had in your home at a bit of a level. And it's actually when cell phones were still in the trunk of your car, by the way, for those that are young out there. This thing used to occupy the entire back of your car. There was one tower in the US, and it cost more than the car it was in, right? So cell phones were essentially a non-technology at that time for most of us. Yet now look at it, all of us have at least one. It's ubiquitous, right? So technology evolves quite rapidly. But what I loved at the time was the fact that electrical engineering, computer science was fascinating to me. I could do anything I wanted with that, right? That was the thing that was going to change the world, and frankly, it has in many different ways. But I had this biology, medicine mix within the science. I remember outside of a high school basketball game, I was kind of trying to figure out what to do with my career. Like, I don't know, to be a doctor, do I be an engineer? Can't really tell. It was my high school biology instructor that basically said, well, why don't you do biomedical engineering? I'm like, what's that? Well, you do engineering for biology and medicine. I'm like, yeah, but that's perfect. Do they actually have that? And so it was from that point that I got to essentially figure out how engineering and biology work together in many different ways. Right? So I did my undergrad actually as an electrical engineer. Then I came to Case Western in '92 and did my PhD in biomedical engineering. And I had been always, as I said, fascinated with computers. In fact, my first purchase I ever stored or saved any money for and bought was an Atari 800 XL. Which also would explain I didn't get married till I was 30. But that's a whole other story. So ultimately, I was always fascinated by how the brain processed information and did work, as well as how I could write computer systems to do work and interesting things. Like I would spend hours, back then, by the way, at the best you had for storage was either a tape drive that you plugged in and recorded when it was coming back. I mean, a cassette tape, if anybody remembers what any of that is, frankly. Or a floppy disk was yay big and held maybe 10K. But I didn't have those. I bought the XL. And so ultimately what I was doing is I programmed for 4 or 5 hours, again, the marriage thing, and I would turn it off and lose it all. But what I would do is I would start the day asking myself, could I do something? Can I make this machine do X, whatever X was? And that was so fascinating to me when I worked. My dad went to Australia at one point, and he was coming back, and he was gone for 2 weeks. That whole 2 weeks, how can I do a display on the TV? Because we plugged in the TV those days. And I'd written this little graphics program for a rocket ship to go up and blow up into, into these fireworks and stuff. It was just because I could, right? Actually, I didn't know if I could. It was because, can I try? Can I make that happen? And that to me has always driven my life to where we're at. So I'll jump ahead quite a bit now, and where does that put us today in the human technology mix? So I'm a neural engineer. I work on ways to communicate to the human nervous system. And what I've been doing in that is the area, for many years, I was doing things like spinal cord injury or swallowing deficit, et cetera. These are things where you have some sort of injury, whether it be a stroke in your brain or you have a break in your spinal cord or something where the body doesn't communicate to the rest of itself any longer. And so there aren't pills to fix that. There isn't a way you just give a medication. There has to be technology. Now, these are people in spinal cord injury, young, right? There are people like a lot of you here. I see plenty of student-age people here. You're invincible. I get it. That's the mindset. I totally understand. However, I know it's not true. You don't yet, but you will someday. And now I'm getting older. I know how just true it is. But a lot of people that have spinal cord injury, or motorcycle accidents, diving accidents, these type of things, and with the healthcare the way it is, you can get to the hospital quickly. So you're 20 years old, you bust your neck, you can't move your arms or legs the rest of your life, but you're alive. Everything is fine. How do you eat? How do you scratch your nose? How do you do any of this kind of thing? And so we've been developing technology, or was initially used, so we can connect to the nerves are all still working there. The communication system of the body is still causing the motors to activate. There's just no connection to the processor, which is your brain. And so we build technology to talk to that nervous system that I can make those motors move again as we want them to. And so for people now with spinal cord injury that weren't connected to their brain, we could actually make their hands move. So the shoulder shrug or something that they could do, you could make them use their hands. Just imagine going from your entire life, I mean, try to do this for 5 minutes while I'm talking. Don't move. I mean, not your feet, not your butt, not your hands, nothing. For the rest of your life. But now I can make it so you can pick up a pencil. It could do something like this, right? Or if you're a quadriplegic with just your lower half, I can get you to stand out of a wheelchair. We worked on technology that had somebody walk down the aisle, basically, for their wedding after they were paralyzed, or at least stand at the altar. I think they went down in the wheelchair and stood there. That was inspiring, but it was output system. So about 15 years ago, I started working on this stuff for the input system, sensory. Started working with people with limb loss. This happened largely with the Middle East conflict. The military got engaged, which a lot of technology advances because of military. And so people were coming back from Iraq and the Middle East with missing limbs. And people come back with no arms and one leg, right? So imagine that type of scenario. So the problem is the prostheses that we had at that time were devices that would grab stuff, et cetera, but they had no feedback to the individual. So it was kind of like you using a hammer or a tool or something of this nature. It was there, it was a tool, but it wasn't you, right? And so it provided some value. So one of the biggest things people were missing was that sense of touch, the ability to understand what the prosthesis was doing. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes with that that I won't drive into, but we knew we had this neural connection, and everything, the hand is missing, but the way the body works is you have a bunch of sensors in your skin. They pick up the information when we touch things, temperature, whatever, and they just send this signal all the way back up to your brain. I have the tools to tap into that brain. It's like using your phone and somebody for those of you who don't know, there used to be wires between phones, right? If you could tap into that system and actually put the information in as though somebody was talking on the other end, the person that we were talking to didn't know whether it was coming from the phone or the wire in the middle, right? So I can do the same thing. If I tap in here and I provide the same thing that would have come from your hand to the brain doesn't know whether it came from my hand or not. And so we did this. We asked somebody our first subject. Now, this is the thing I have to always give a shout out to the people that volunteer their lives effectively to work with us on this technology. So we asked a gentleman who lost his arm, and we said, "Do you mind participating in this study?" And it was essentially an implanted device on the residual of his limb, what he had left. He was pretty long, it was just his hand missing. So he said yes. Fool. So, I mean, I was very grateful for this, but also incredibly nervous, right? So we did this implant. First day he comes in afterwards, we turned this on for the first time, and his first comment was, "That's my thumb. I haven't felt my thumb since the accident." I get goosebumps still today. That's the kind of work I get to do, is make that kind of difference in somebody's life, right? And so we've asked every one of these people, we've asked them, we said, what is it that you want? And you think when you miss your hand, the first thing they're going to say is, "I want to be able to do task X, which I'm missing." There isn't a single person that has said a task X first. What do you think the first thing they said is?
Feel my hand.
Nope, close. Yes. What you realize is that we take for granted one of the most amazing things we have, which is our way of exploring the world and connecting to those around us, to the tasks we do, which is that sense of touch. Right? The closest any of us can experience in Cleveland here is when it's cold and you forget your gloves. You come in and you can't feel anything. It's hard, you can't, or your cheeks freeze. This is the one that always gets me. You're really cold, you can't talk, right? The muscles are working fine, but just because you don't have that sensory component, you can't connect with the world. You can't drive basic functions we're used to. And that's kind of what happened with prostheses. So that was the thing. And so now we have one gentleman here that for DARPA's 60th anniversary, he had a prosthesis that we've been working with DARPA, which is they build all kinds of fancy stuff. They'll remind you constantly they built the internet, fine, whatever. But when we were at their 60th anniversary, the person they put in the front of their booth, of their whole display area, was our booth with our subject. And I'll never forget this subject. He'd been in our program for about 4 years, and this was the first time he called us down. It wasn't even during the display at the time. He called us down. He had the program manager, some high-level folks there, myself and my team. He said, "I want you to be a part of this." And for the first time, his wife came in. They stood looking at each other for a few minutes, they had the system on. He just kind of put out the prosthesis. She grabbed his hand. And they both started kind of crying. He's like, "I feel you." That moment is the kind of thing I live for, right? Because it's not building widgets, which is a lot of what this stuff is, but it's building connections, building people. It's using technology to change the way we live in a positive way. And so that's the prosthesis side. I'm happy to talk about a ton of that. I don't want to bore you with all the stories we have there. There's a lot of interesting things. I was fortunate enough to meet President Biden, having done this work. It's the type of thing, as they're launching, you may have heard of ARPA-H, which is based on DARPA, so the Advanced Research Projects Agency, but now for health. And because of what we've been able to do in DARPA, that was something that when President Biden introduced this program, he had us on stage, which was quite phenomenal, frankly. It was really an honor for me and our subject. This guy that touched his wife's hand actually had a moment to talk to President Biden about this, and the impact was actually fun just to watch. It wasn't as much about me being there, but seeing the interaction between the two of them and the impact it made was hugely rewarding. But let's take this one step further, and then I'll kind of wrap up here my remarks. When we asked the subject what it's like to use the prosthesis, I kind of alluded to it before. I said, "What's it like without the system on?" And they talk about using a tool. It's like a hammer. It's like if you pick something up, right? It's not really them. They have a tool for themselves. But as soon as we turn that system on, they don't even enough to ask them. They say, "I am picking it up with my hand." Right? They talk about their hand doing the task. So even though it's a prosthesis, a robotic system, it's their hand picking up a task. So the thing is, that's digital data. I can put the prosthesis anywhere in the world. It'll feel the same. Think about that a minute. That's a robot. Pure and simple. We call it a prosthesis, fancy name, but it's a robot. His hand is that robot. It's part of who he is. Expand that now. So we're on the cusp, and what we're trying to do is the future of the human, not using technology. All of us wear clothes. We pick up, we touch our devices. There's still something separate from us that we interact with. It's not the case with people with prostheses any longer. It's not the case that we have to use technology. We're on the cusp of changing from use paradigm with technology to being paradigm. Now, without getting too, and I love these conversations, and we only have a limited time, and I limited it even further, but think about what reality is. What's it mean to be you? And all you hear about nowadays is Elon Musk and brain interfaces and all this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of freaking out about that, et cetera. First off, ignore some of the hype. It's not going to really work. Elon's Elon. But how many of you have ever interacted with the world by unscrewing your cranium and sticking your cortex into that world? None of us. Every one of you interacts. Everything you are is through your senses. Our existence is our senses from out here. That's what we can tap into. But now think about it, if that existence now is no longer limited by the skin, I can provide information, but from somewhere else in the world, you're still you. But your existence is expanded beyond the biology that you're limited within your skin. I can amplify you in your location. And you're not limited by this weak biological system we have. I mean, let's admit it, right? I mean, we are weak. Awesome, but weak. But now, I can give you whatever technology I can build, and that's your capability. If you can control it. So the other thing we do with prostheses, they don't shrug their shoulders. They think about moving their hand. I record that information, and that makes the hand move like they wanted it to. Put that on anything you want. Right? Build that system so when I think about moving, whether I'm a prosthesis hand that mimics the biology or I'm a two-story tall robotic system out there building a building and I'm looking and I'm picking up Legos. There happen to be a ton, but the system, I don't know that difference. I can make that decision. I can be in a factory somewhere across the world doing a task even though I'm sitting in Cleveland in my family room even potentially. The way we can work with technology changes us. We're working to amplify our location, amplify the human location, amplify the human capability. And wherever I can build technology to be, whether it's biologically safe or not, I can be there. So now I can amplify your resilience. Imagine the jobs in space or the deep sea welding or all these other places that are dangerous for the human to be. How much of our time in space is spent trying to figure out how to make the biology safe? If I can remove that and still put you there mentally, it changes the game completely. Okay, so that's the kind of technology we're working on. For those of you who are like, yeah, but it's implanted, we're never going to do it. Sure, but we've been developing now where you can put on a glove. I have a graduate student now here in Cleveland and those in California. We have a robotic system set up in LA where a person in Cleveland puts on an Oculus headset. There's a camera in LA and mounted on the head. When they open their eyes, they're in the lab of my partner in LA, our colleagues. The robot is the head. When they move their arm, the robot follows it. So they look down, they see the robotic arm, it's their arm. When they touch something, they feel it in their finger in Cleveland. That's the difference, that's the future, right? So I think that's the Human Fusions Institute we're trying to build that. But here, let me finish on the last thing I want to get in, talking about what's this mean for the ethics of it. We always hear about data security, the human, the safety of the internet and all that kind of stuff. Imagine it now if you are in the internet. Imagine if your experience is what's on the internet and going out between these things. There's a whole other level of challenge. And here's what we've done wrong, in my view, with technology since the beginning of technology, is that we're engineers that build it most of the time. And we build it because, as I said back with my early days of Atari, because I could, or I wanted to. So I said, can I do that? And what I didn't think about anything about how do I get it done? And I built it. But that's a problem. Right? Especially now as technology evolves faster than our processes for dealing with it half the time. Look at, I don't know where people work, so I won't mention the social media outlet that I always do for this. But there are certain things that are built that become problems when they're too big to solve. Where if we thought about the common things that we know are going to be a problem from the beginning by having anthropologists, by having those with ethics, working from the beginning, thinking about technology on day one, right? Look at our institution as the way it is today, and this is one of the things I love about the new president, I love about the university and where it's going right now, is we are siloed, but we're going to change that, right? How many of you are, I'm not going to ask this question as MEM, I'm going to assume you're all engineers who I love, and I'm going to say that right now. But how many of us think as engineers, like arts and sciences, like, damn it, I have to read a book? Yeah, I like that, sort of. That is such an inspiring thing that arts and sciences do. We can't ignore them. There's no reason. These walls should go away. Think about the early days of history or the early days of science. These were philosophers. Newton was a philosopher that used math to describe complex things, and somehow we've broken that. And now we want to go back, and so the whole idea of the human technology is to say, how from the beginning does the ethicist sit on that side of the table, the anthropologist next to that, the legal people there, and us as engineers here, and talk about, hey, I can make you anywhere in the world. The ethicists go, yeah, but how are we going to use that? Because then I can build the safeguards in from the beginning, and we can build ethical technology, if you will, right? Not to limit technology. I'm not talking about the ethicists who go, technology sucks, don't do it. Because that's the other side of this, which is also wrong. The question is, how do we build responsibly from the beginning so when it's easy, we can put this in there, right? And I'll finish this by saying that, and I don't want to go into politics, I have no desire to go into politics, but our systems were built in the 1700s. We have a government system that's a government system, and I'm not going to make any statements one way or the other about that, but it wasn't built with the technology we have now. We know technology evolves much further than the systems that are kind of built to do it, right? So we need to use technology and build it as engineers responsibly from the beginning. And so the idea of the Human Fusion Institute is to try and figure out how humans and technology evolve to the next level so we can actually expand the human, right? I mean, if you see all this stuff in the media, like you watch Black Mirror, which I love, by the way, but it's dystopic, right? And that's fine, that's what artists do. But if you ever, but the question is, how do we look at the best that technology can be? Throughout history, anytime technology has made a change, there's always been those that say it's going to ruin humanity. And it can, but it can't. It also could make us so much better. And the difference is not whether the technology exists, but it's how we manage it and what we do along the way. Everything has a possibility either direction. And I like the quote from President Kennedy back during the space era, at least that's where I knew it from. If he copied somebody else, I apologize who he copied from. But technology itself has no conscience. Technology is not good or bad. It's our way of dealing with it. It's how we manage it that's important. And so we need to build institutes at the university that do both together. We break down the walls between the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Engineering so we work together. And so Human Fusions Institute is doing that. We're hiring faculty that will co-locate across these domains. They'll have conversations at the water cooler, not a meeting once a month when they can get together, right? And so with that, I'll just sort of end with the idea that the vision of the future for me is that technology is going to expand the human capability. I don't care how much they talk about autonomy and autonomous robots and all these type of things. They work great in structured environments where the outputs are and the inputs are known, and we can go back to history, but the human works in unstructured environments. We make decisions, our life experience matters. And when we can combine those two, or HI and AI, which work together, that is a beautiful world where the human becomes much bigger than our skin, it becomes much further than our muscles, and that's what the future is that we're looking for. And with that, I'll end there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Tyler. And if anyone is interested in more of his research, I strongly recommend I Am Human. It is a movie that he was a part of a couple of years ago. I had to watch it for class. So after that insightful commentary, I do want to ask all of our panelists and open it back up to the rest of our panelists. As science such as biomedical engineering and data analytics advance quicker than some of the institutions that started them, where do you see opportunities for society, and where do you see ethical questions start to arise? And we can start with Kyle.
Sure. So I think maybe we'll start on the opportunity side, right? I think they're endless. I think you heard what Professor Tyler talked about, right? Taking that and expanding on that, right, to taking what it used to make to cycle time to develop a product and cutting it by 90%, to taking something like a cell phone that used to fit in the trunk of a car, and now we all carry around something more powerful than the first computer I ever had in my pocket, right? I mean, I think it really is limitless as where we're going. And on the flip side, not to take a cliche movie quote, but with great power comes great responsibility, right? I think to the point of this conversation, the first thing that companies have to do is actually start asking that question, right? And so actually start thinking about that from the beginning, and Professor Tyler, you said that as well, right? And so I'll give you my example from the company I work for, Accenture. I am forced with every new piece of work we do to answer the question of, are we doing something in the AI space? And if we are, is it ethical? And is it to our standards that we have set as a company? Now, who's to say our standards are perfect? They're not. I'm sure they're not. Who's to say they'll keep up with the technology? They won't. But the first step is asking the question, right? And so when companies start to ask those questions, I think that is, I think that's step one. I think step two, and you'll hear people talk about, right, unconscious bias in the context of AI ML, right? I think that's one thing that companies and individuals really have to look out for, right, is how do you avoid, because the reality is the technology doesn't think, right? At least not yet. It is programmed by humans, right? And so it is programmed to react the way the human programmed it. And so if there's bias in how it is developed and how it is programmed, then there will be bias in the outcome of how the technology operates, right? And so I think that's the second thing. And maybe I'll leave you with this, right? I ultimately see it, what I talk to my clients about a lot is use the technology to let your people go back to doing the things they want to do. One of my recent clients did a study of engineering productivity of their workforce. 70% of an engineer's time was spent doing things that had absolutely nothing to do with designing products, attending status meetings, creating PowerPoint slides, doing finances. Engineers don't want to do that. They want to build things. They want to design, and that's what they're, that's what they're good at, and that's what they're paid to do, right? And so what we talk a lot about is how can you use the technology to give your people time back to do what you actually hired them to do and let them enjoy their jobs again.
Adam?
So a little different angle on this, and ultimately the evolution of technology and how it impacts workspace, particularly for somebody in manufacturing. For decades, we've been talking about, are robots going to eliminate jobs? And there's different schools of thought on that. And obviously, from an engineering perspective, AI and AR, VR, and some of these technologies that are really going to help us reach past where we've been able to go creates a ton of opportunities for engineers to build and design and maintain. And for me, the opportunity for society and all that advancement and great jobs around that is valid. And then there's this underlying piece that every time we apply automation and we apply technology and it does displace some amount of work, we as a society, I feel, have a responsibility to help the folks that are being eliminated from that to raise their skills into those other job categories. And there's certain verticals and certain industries where that division is getting wider, where as a society, we don't, the really easy one would be a piece of automation or robotics is eliminating these direct labor roles in a manufacturing facility. Well, it's going to create a high-skilled robotics technician role also, but are all of the young folks going through high schools in every neighborhood, in every segment of our society, getting the opportunities to be exposed to a robotics technician job versus an unskilled labor type of job. So I think on the net, we'll see great benefit as a country, as a global economic engine, but we've got to be really intentional to make sure that doesn't split harder than it has in the past.
Yeah, Chioma, do you see any of that happening in more business analytics?
Yes, so in the business analytics space, like when you recommend companies what to do, like, hey, maybe for this type of customer, push this product, for this type of customer, push this product. So with all like data analytics and how advanced data analytics has gotten, I do see a huge opportunity for very predictive, very tailorable recommendations, because every company is different and every business segment is different. Even in one company, you can have 20 business segments. But with that, where ethical questions could arise is if you are using data analytics to determine, what business products to give people, you also have to ask the ethical question, are there any differences in the types of products you are giving to different demographics of people? So I'm not going to mix any words here, but like in like the banking space, for example, like when it comes to loans, if you're using data analytics and your data is very biased, you may give subpar loans to like Black people or like other people of color and give better loans to white people because the people who created this data can be very biased. And when you're in this room, like looking at the data, asking these ethical questions, you also have to pay attention who's in the room when you're discussing ethics. If you're looking at data and it's only one type of person in the room, obviously some things are going to fall through, right? So that's where I think some ethical questions will arise, is like when we have data to make recommendations, are we taking into account the biases that may come from it? And it can be unconscious bias, like we may not even know that we're doing it. And after the outcomes, come, how do we analyze how positive the impact is. So yeah, that's where I see it going.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Tyler, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that were said. Of course people are going to be displaced, right? The most powerful union in New York in the 20s was the elevator operators union. Because who's going to hop on an elevator and trust this thing to take you 30 floors into the sky? Then they went on strike, and then they lost their jobs because the automation became something that could actually take over that job. And the same thing with chauffeurs and people that drove cars, right? When the cars came in, there were ads that I never see it. There's things that we'll see no more use than 150 cars, right, to replace the wagons, et cetera. So technology will always displace people, and that itself sounds bad if you make it that way, but it's not, right? The question is, how do we do it ethically and reasonably? But it also makes us a lot more capable of doing things now because the elevator is something we go everywhere. It actually allows for more opportunity, right? So I want to just reemphasize that I agree. Of course people will just be displaced. If that's your criteria of whether success or technology should move forward or not, you might as well stop developing technology now. The question shouldn't be whether you're displaced. The question be, does it make our life as a whole better? At the end of the day, that's what we have to get to. And then to the second side, I think the great question is, how do we shrink, not grow the digital divide, depending on how you want to write this. And I think the fundamental problem, well, there's not going to say not fun, that's a little arrogant. But I think one of the fundamental problems is that it was hinted here, is we never have all the voices in the room when we start designing the technology in the first place. Yep. And one of the key things I always teach students when I used to teach our design class is you can be absolutely the perfect engineer. And if you get the input requirements and you can build the absolute perfect device to capture the input requirements, you still have the worst product in the world if the input requirements are wrong. So the whole point is getting the input correct. And if you're not hearing the voice of everybody that you need to design for, you're not hearing the voice, right? And their product will suck. It won't capture the need of who we're trying to get to. So why is it that a bunch of professors like myself are defining that technology of the future? I don't know everything that I need to know for designing this in for the folks that I really want to take advantage of it. Think of the opportunities where you don't need to drive to a job anymore, right? If you can work from your home, and the issues of transportation or financial changes that we can make by allowing you to work at different places. But if I don't develop the technology to do that, we miss the opportunity. So it's not so much that we have to get those voices into the process early on. If it's just places like the university where we aren't hearing those voices, even if it's not students, but reaching out to those communities as part of the design in the first place, super critical, right? And then the last part of that is with those, everybody needs to see themselves in an environment doing this design. When high tech seems to be not part of who and what you can do, we miss it. Right? And so I have a lot of my students now, plenty of the URM students that, I've been talking to them. Why wouldn't you come here? It's not like we're going to recruit more people to the university. It's got to go way before that. Most of it was like I never saw anybody like myself. I never thought this is anything I could do, right? I was in 5th grade and didn't think I could do math. That's where we start. We have to reach out on all these different levels for that to shrink this divide. It's not something we just build different technology. That's way too simplistic of a view.
Thank you. So Adam, kind of going back to where you're talking about the divide in hiring or just, the lost placement. So there are a lot of students here. So I guess coming from, a hiring perspective or just a company's side, what kind of companies or how can companies, attract young workers, especially people who are coming out of CASE or, other universities?
Mm-hmm. So I think the commentary about what graduates are looking for has been pretty consistent and getting louder around students want to be connected with a bigger cause and a mission and an organization that's having an impact on the world. And most companies have heard that and are shaping, even if I make this widget, I have to connect that widget to something broader and a sense of purpose. There's other elements of folks. Young people want to land and feel like they have a path, and companies are doing the work to show, okay, here's where you land and here's how your career pathway goes. And I think the interesting part of this technology discussion is that now, particularly through the last couple of years where virtual work and remote work has become prevalent for pandemic reasons, but now it's also become a desire of those same students to say, I want to be connected and I want to be developed. And then there's this contradiction or this dichotomy of it's that much harder for a young person to pick up on organizational knowledge when their only interactions with folks, with their coworkers, are by Zoom. And it's that much harder to train somebody and bring them up to speed when it's only through Teams conversations and it's only through virtual interactions. So I think this is something that we'll end up having to deal with or reckon with over the next number of years, because our workforce demographics are shifting. There's going to be really skilled, that implicit knowledge that we talk about expanding and having technology leverage our experience and our ability to deal with ambiguous situations better than AI. But there's a lot of that knowledge that's going to leave the workforce in the next 5 or 10 years without having the water cooler conversations, kind of the informal apprenticeship relationships that happened very differently than over Zoom. And I think that's something that's hard to capture when a lot of how companies make their statement in recruiting is completely digital. I actually had a recruiter for a job posting we were launching. It used to be that, we have to stay on top of our Glassdoor and our LinkedIn and all that because candidates. I have a recruiter that essentially was going through a qualification. They weren't going to work with us unless our Glassdoor looked good and our LinkedIn profile looked good. So they're working even more upstream on the decision as to whether we win somebody is so far ahead of the first conversation. And that the digital presence has to be X, Y, and Z in order to start the conversation, which to me just foreshadows even more of that happening without actual interaction in the workplace and before the workplace.
Thank you. And kind of going off of that, Kyle, I saw you nodding your head a lot, but have you noticed a change, especially with people who are going into aerospace and defense who want a larger purpose in that area, especially with the ethics involved with that?
Absolutely. And just maybe to pile on a couple things you said, Adam, the conversation around things learned by osmosis, right? I was actually having this conversation yesterday with one of my colleagues. We're seeing that in folks who have been with our company for 5 to 7 years, let's call it, there are things that we would have implicitly expected them to be doing that we are not seeing them do at the level we'd like to see them do. And it's things that we never really taught, right? Basic project management things, how to interact. And just so some of that, it's definitely something that we're all running into head on and going to have to figure out how to close that gap. And I think the other thing, maybe taking this the unconscious bias route, is there's also a reckoning coming with the concept of FaceTime to advance. Right? Needing to feel like you have to be in front of your leaders and they have to know who you are and you're getting that FaceTime, that is becoming less and less as the world is more remote. The reality is, because I'll tell you, I'm also come to it at times, of there is an unconscious bias there in the workforce of when you see somebody more and you're with somebody more, you just have a greater appreciation for who they are and what they do. And we're going to have to figure out how to overcome that. But not to totally circumvent your question, I promise I'll get to it. So I think in aerospace and defense, and maybe let's take the defense side of aerospace and defense, right? Because I think it's in Boeing 737 and 787 problems aside, on the commercial side, I think in the defense, this is always a bit more of a prevalent question, right? And I will absolutely tell you in the past, I'd say 3 years, I have had more people who are new to Accenture express concern to me about working for a company that builds defense product, so things that go boom, let's say, than I had ever heard before. And so I definitely see the younger generation trying to connect with a purpose, and in this case, maybe not finding that connection with these companies, which is an interesting phenomenon for me as someone who serves those companies as my client. I think for those companies, it's a really interesting phenomenon in that when you think about the type of talent they compete for now, it is the same talent that could go work at Facebook even if they have their problems, Google, Tesla, right? So all of a sudden, the skills that are desirable in the workforce, it's no longer necessarily an aerospace engineer goes to an aerospace company and a software engineer goes to a software company. Software engineers like the number one thing that an aerospace and defense company needs right now. And so it is also impacting their ability to get top talent in the door now, and is going to be something they're trying to solve for when they think about the viability of their products going forward.
And Chioma, I wanted to ask about, you were saying, especially with unconscious bias, how can we combat that if we're going to more, remote work, and how can we do that if we're not seeing each other in person and we're not having these conversations?
That's a really good that's a really good question. Like, that's something that I struggle with to think about, but I would say I feel like in our place of work, we do need more training about racial diversity and about the unconscious biases that we have, because a lot of us, we don't have that training. A lot of companies do not provide adequate time for that training. Like, they'll have like one session, you ask some questions, and then that's it. You have to go do your job. You really don't have time to sit and reflect. So I think that's like one aspect, like training that is intentional. And the people who are doing the training, they probably should be part of the community, right? So that's one. As for not seeing each other, I'm gonna say I don't know. Like I'm so sorry. Like I really don't know, because like we do want people to put on their cameras and show who they are and make a connection with someone on the other side of the screen. But for some people, they may be nervous, or they may like, well, once they see my face, they're automatically not going to like me. Like at my company, people are putting like their profiles. I haven't put my profile yet because I'm really scared that people are just going to see me and they're like, oh, she's dumb. Or like, oh, she's not as smart, right? And so it's just like, yeah, I just feel like we have to do better in training, and we also have to let people know about their unconscious biases and how to identify it so they can correct for it when it happens. But it's a process.
Well, thank you for all of your thoughts. I know that we are at time, but I guess I just wanted to ask any closing remarks or things to tell. It looks like we have some students, Case Western students here, so advice to give them moving forward, how to merge technology and humanity. We can start with Dr. Tyler.
The world is always changing. If you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you, because the world is always changing. I think we get stuck in the idea of facts, and education is a bunch of classroom facts we get told from a book. It's all fair, you need that stuff. But the one thing, if I'm talking to the students, is follow a passion. Right? At the end of the day, this is where, to the point earlier, people want to come to the university for a cause. They want to make a difference in the world. We want to live for meaning, right? And don't worry about what major you're going to pick or that kind of stuff. Do things you're passionate about from a major, get what you like. At the end of the day, follow a passion. There's been so many challenges along the way of where we are and what we've been doing, that if I was worried about that, I would have never gotten anywhere. But knowing that I can create something, that I can make a difference in the world, that I'm passionate about how people, in the case of prostheses, are going to make a difference in somebody's lives. And then what I think the future can be for this human technology mix, that's what drives me every day, right? There's going to be all kinds of crap along the way, right? I mean, life is hard. There's a lot of hard pieces here. And if it's not hard, it's probably not worth it, quite honestly. So the one piece of advice I would give for students is don't settle, right? Find your passion, live for passion, not for degree, not for grade, not for what somebody tells you is the right pathway. Right? My wife gave me a question, one of the best gifts I've ever gotten was a little plaque that's about yay long, has one question written on it. It says, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I love that question, because what it means is, what am I passionate about? Not about where am I going to make money, not about what the society thinks is the correct path for an engineer, right? But what is it that I want to do to make a difference, to make the world better for me and for others? And if you can always work from that, then I think you're in the right path and you're going to be happy, right? I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road all over the place. If the bump is what you're focused on, you're not going to be happy. If you're following a passion, it doesn't matter how many bumps or hills are in the road, you're going to be happy. You're going to be doing what you want. So pick your passion, whatever it is. I think technology will, from the human technology perspective, human technology has all kinds of opportunity. You think we have a lot of advanced technology now, we're not even close, right? We've got a lot of problems we've created. Don't go like, oh, technology sucks. Fix them. Figure out how to make it better. Don't give up. Make it better.
Thank you. We can just go down the line. So Chioma?
Yeah, so advice that I would give to students is go at your own pace. I know it is very, very easy to compare yourself to what everyone else is doing, especially if you're from, so I'm Nigerian, so especially if you're from a cultural background where your parents are like, look at so-and-so's daughter, look at so-and-so's son. But do go at your own pace and know that it is okay if you feel behind your peers. Because the peers that seem far ahead of you, you do not know what fire that they, like I can tell you guys some stories, but you do not know what fire that they had to go through to get that. So, your journey is your own, and as you know, you're coming to this school or like whatever school and you're studying like engineering or technology, always remember the human side. Technology greatly affects people. Our data greatly affects populations. So please, if you can take a sociology class, an anthropology class, or like a psych class, so you don't end up building things that would negatively impact people's lives. So that would be the advice that I give. And also have fun. Life is not all about grades. I'm going to tell you, I failed a class here. and I'm still here. So you'll be okay. And whatever mistakes you make will be your own. And you'll be okay. And you just keep on moving.
It wasn't mine, by the way.
No, it wasn't his, no.
Thank you, Kyle.
I think my advice would be pretty simple, and it'd be patient. Whether it's being patient with others as they're frustrated of how technology is impacting their lives, and be understanding and compassionate about what that is. Whether that's a guy like me who be patient with me as I try to figure this out some days, and just kind of in general, right? I think the reality is this is all very new for us, right? The concept of human plus machine and the pace that technology has advanced is, what are we, 30 years into the internet, and how many thousand years of human history, right? Just think about it on that scale. This is very much still in its infancy as the way the world is, and I would just say be patient.
Thank you. And finally, Adam?
My advice would center around being really intentional about your development after graduation. We all go through this crazy steep and difficult learning curve in engineering school, and it's really easy to just go, okay, whew, and I got this job, and they're going to tell me what I have to learn. But I think one of the common themes here is that things are changing so fast that if you wait for someone to give you what you need to learn next, the way that your professors did for 4 or 5 years or whatever, that it's not going to come that fast. And you have to be really intentional about how you learn about companies you want to work for, how you learn about jobs you want next, how do you pick up that knowledge when there is no water cooler, there's no osmosis learning. And so it's an uncomfortable feeling potentially, but leaning into that development and leaning into what's uncomfortable. And no one's going to push you as effectively as you are at your pace. You may have parents pushing you, you may have a boss pushing you, but really getting a feel for where do I need to learn, where do I want to learn, and being intentional about that development.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to thank all of our panelists for spending the time. I know I learned a lot, and I have a lot of questions for you after this. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.